It was a Thursday afternoon in late October when 9-year-old Mia disappeared. The sky over the small town of Maple Hollow had turned an ashen gray, and the wind carried the brittle scent of fallen leaves. The world felt quiet that day. Too quiet. At first, no one noticed she was gone. Mia had always been a quiet child, but ever since the divorce, she'd barely spoken at all. Her parents' separation 6 months ago had split her world in two. Her father now lived 3 towns away, with a woman Mia had never met. Her mother, brittle with exhaustion, tried to hold things together with long shifts at the diner. No one asked Mia how she was feeling, and she didn't know how to say she was breaking. That morning, Mia sat alone in her room, hugging her worn-out teddy bear, Oliver. Her mother and grandfather had argued in the kitchen. The words were sharp and fast, about bills, about Mia, about 100 small resentments finally spoken out loud. No one noticed when Mia slipped out the back door. She wandered past the backyard, through the narrow path that led into the woods behind the neighborhood. She didn't plan to run away. She just wanted quiet. The kind of quiet where no one yelled, and no one cried, and no one expected her to smile when she didn't feel like it. The trees stood tall and bare, their limbs reaching like claws toward the sky. Mia walked further, watching squirrels dart, across fallen logs and birds scatter from the underbrush. She imagined herself a part of the forest, just another shadow beneath the trees. As the sun dipped lower, the woods grew cooler. Mia didn't notice how far she'd gone. She didn't know the forest well, and the trail, once clear, had vanished beneath layers of leaves. When she finally stopped walking, she realized she didn't recognize anything around her. The panic came slow at first, then all at once. She turned in circles, calling for her mother. There was no answer. The wind moved through the trees like a whispering voice. Mia hugged Oliver tighter. Back home, the silence stretched on. It wasn't until dinner time that Mia's mother realized the house was too quiet, the backyard too empty. She called for Mia. No response. She checked the neighbors, the corner store, even the library. Nothing. That's when the fear crept in. Within the hour, the police were called. Flashlights danced across the edge of the woods. Names were shouted. Dogs barked. But the woods swallowed sound. And deep inside that forest, as twilight settled in and shadows lengthened, Mia stood alone, clutching her bear. She didn't know that eyes were already watching her from the darkness, and she had no idea that something wild was coming for her, and something braver was racing to reach her first. The deeper Mia walked into the forest, the less she thought about going home. The crunch of leaves under her sneakers was oddly comforting. Every step felt like a small rebellion, against the yelling, against the silence that followed, against the feeling of being invisible. She didn't know where she was going, but at least out here, she wasn't being pulled in 2 directions. At first, the woods were gentle. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, casting golden pools of light onto the forest floor. There were chipmunks darting between tree roots and birdsong echoing above. Mia pretended she was an explorer, like the ones she saw in books, quiet, clever, brave. But as the sun began to fall lower in the sky, the woods began to change. The light grew dimmer, and the air cooler. The shadows between the trees stretched and thickened. The trail, if it had ever been a trail, was gone. Mia turned to go back the way she came, but every direction looked the same. She tried retracing her steps. She didn't recognize the moss-covered rocks or the twisted trees. Everything looked like everything else. She called out, "Mom!" Her voice was thin. It barely rose above the sound of the wind. No answer. She stood still, listening. Somewhere far off, a woodpecker tapped against a tree. The sound was sharp, like distant knocking. Mia clutched Oliver to her chest. She tried walking again, this time in a straight line, she told herself. But the forest was not made for straight. The roots jutted out of the ground like crooked bones. Branches snagged her sleeves. Thorns scratched her shins. Her shoes, once white, were now muddy and soaked through. She walked until the sky turned from pale blue to steel gray. That's when the cold set in. It wasn't the kind of cold you felt in winter with snow and scarves. It was the deep, creeping cold of damp air and fear. It slid down her neck and into her spine. Mia stopped walking. She couldn't tell how far she had gone. Her legs ached, her stomach growled, her lips were dry. She sat down beneath a wide oak tree, trying not to cry. She told herself this would just be for a little while. Someone would come. They'd be looking for her by now. She imagined her mom calling her name, the neighbors with flashlights, maybe even a police officer or two. She pictured Thor, the family dog they used to have before the divorce, coming to find her. But there was no Thor, and no voices, just the rustling of leaves. It got darker. Mia pressed her cheek against Oliver's worn fur. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was still trying to be brave like in the stories. But the forest was no longer a storybook place. It was full of strange sounds, twigs snapping, wind howling low, a far-off rustle that didn't sound like a squirrel. She stayed still for a long time. Minutes? Hours? Time didn't feel real anymore. Every second stretched into forever. Then she heard something, a low, distant howl. She sat bolt upright, her ears strained. Maybe it was a dog. Maybe someone's pet. Then she heard it again, longer. This time, louder, more wild. A coyote? No, not quite. The sound was too deep, too layered. It wasn't one voice. It was many. Her mouth went dry. She remembered something from school. A documentary they'd shown about predators in the wild. Wolves didn't live this far south, at least not usually. But animals moved when food was scarce. And lately there had been stories on the news, sightings, tracks, something about a growing pack moving closer to town. She had thought they were just stories. Now they didn't feel like stories. Mia stood up. Her knees were shaking. She looked around. The woods were darker than before, thick with fog that had begun to settle low to the ground. The trees swayed in a wind she couldn't feel. Every sound now felt like a whisper, a threat. She tried to move quietly, slowly stepping over logs and around trees, but she wasn't trained for this. Every branch she stepped on snapped like a firecracker. Her breath was too loud. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. Another howl, closer, and then silence, which was worse. The birds had stopped chirping. The insects had gone quiet. Even the wind had stilled. It was the kind of silence that made the hairs on your arms rise, the kind that warned you something was watching. Mia turned in a slow circle, her eyes darting. Then she saw them. 2 glowing dots in the distance. Then 4, then 6, eyes yellow, reflective, watching. A rustle in the bushes. A paw step, soft, deliberate. A growl, barely audible, like the purr of an engine. Mia backed up until her foot hit a tree root and she fell backward. She didn't scream. She couldn't. The fear had grabbed her voice and swallowed it whole. She held Oliver close. The eyes came closer. Mia sat frozen against the base of the tree, her small frame trembling as she stared into the darkness. The eyes were still there. Too many to count now. They blinked slowly, shifting positions. One pair would vanish, only to reappear closer. Another would move to the side, flanking her. She was being surrounded. A low, guttural growl rumbled from somewhere to her left, then another from the right. The air thickened with a new kind of silence, one that felt alive, like the forest. Itself was holding its breath. She couldn't see the creatures clearly yet, only hints, a glint of fur in the moonlight, a shadow slipping behind a bush, a paw step soft as a whisper. Her breath caught. She dared not move. The wolves were communicating, though Mia didn't know how she knew. They weren't barking. They weren't even loud. But there was something in the way they shifted, the way their eyes aligned. She could feel the tension building, like a string pulled taut and ready to snap. One of the shapes stepped forward. It was big, bigger than she expected, bigger than the dogs in her neighborhood. Its shoulders moved with deliberate grace, each step calculated. Mia could now see its teeth, just barely glinting as it opened its mouth and let out a breathy huff. Its eyes never left hers. Mia wanted to scream, but she didn't. Somehow, deep inside, something told her to stay quiet, still, small. She squeezed her bear tighter as if Oliver could protect her, as if some thread of childhood magic might make her invisible. Another wolf appeared from the other side, smaller but faster. It crept in a half circle around her, nose low to the ground, sniffing, tasting the air. Mia's thoughts ran wild. Why were they waiting? Why hadn't they attacked? Then it hit her. They were playing with her, testing her like a cat with a trapped mouse, measuring her fear. She shifted her legs slightly, just a twitch, and one of the wolves flinched forward. An inch, just 1 inch. Enough to let her know they were ready. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Please." A sudden howl split the night air. It was so loud and close it made her jump. It echoed through the forest like a siren, high and eerie. One of the wolves answered, then another, and another. A terrible chorus. Mia cried out, clapping her hands over her ears. The forest roared back with the sound of the pack. It was a sound, older than time, older than stories. It belonged to the wild. Mia curled into a ball, heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Her body was shivering uncontrollably now, not just from the cold, but from a kind of fear she had never known, primal, pure, and paralyzing. Then something changed. The wolves stopped moving. They stopped howling. They went still. Their eyes didn't leave her, but their attention shifted slightly, subtly. They had heard something. Mia heard it too. At first it was faint, a distant crunch of leaves, then another. Heavier this time, rhythmic. Something else was moving through the forest. The wolves turned. One by one they faced the direction of the sound. Their bodies went rigid, heads lowered. A few took a step back. One even growled, defensively. It was like they recognized the new arrival, and they didn't like it. Mia lifted her head. She couldn't see anything yet, but she could feel it, the shift in the forest's energy. The wolves, so confident a moment ago, were suddenly unsure. Then, she saw a shadow emerge from the underbrush, a dog, not just any dog. This one moved with purpose. It was larger than any she had seen, all muscle and focus. Its coat was dark, sleek, and dusted with leaves. Around its neck, a collar with a glowing tag bounced as it walked, and on its side, barely visible in the moonlight, the letters K9. It was a working dog, a police dog, a hero. The lead wolf snarled, lips curling back in a warning. The K9 didn't flinch. It stopped between Mia and the pack, planting itself like a wall of fur and fury. For the first time that night, Mia felt something like hope. The dog let out a low, deep growl, one that shook through the ground. It didn't bark. It didn't charge. It just stood its ground, daring them to come closer. The wolves hesitated. They circled, testing, gauging. Then one lunged. The K9 moved like lightning. It met the wolf mid-air, teeth flashing. There was a terrible yelp, a blur of motion. Fur flew. Then another wolf jumped. The K9 turned, fast and ruthless, biting and dodging. Mia screamed. The fight was violent and fast. The K9 stood alone but never backed down. The wolves snapped and struck. But they didn't expect this. They didn't expect to face something that didn't fear them. Blood hit the leaves, and still the K9 fought. At last, with a sharp bark and a final snap, the wolves retreated, slowly, then faster, then running. Gone. The forest fell silent again. The K9 turned to Mia, panting hard. There was blood on its fur, some of it its own. But its eyes were kind, calm. It stepped toward her slowly, carefully, and then it sat, like it had been waiting for her all along. Officer David Reyes didn't hesitate when the call came in. Missing child, 9 years old, last seen near the forest behind Maple Hollow. His heart dropped. He had seen too many of these stories end badly, especially when it involved woods and falling temperatures. But this time, he had an advantage. His partner was already in the truck, pacing in the back seat, nose twitching. Thor, a 7-year-old German shepherd trained in search and rescue, narcotics, and patrol work, was more than just a dog. To David, he was family. "Let's go find her," David said quietly as he started the engine. The sun was already dipping. Low as they pulled up to the search site, red and blue lights strobed against the tree trunks. Volunteers huddled in jackets. A mother stood off to the side, clinging to a photograph of her daughter, face pale and eyes red. "Her name's Mia," she told them, voice cracking. "She's got a teddy bear named Oliver. She never goes anywhere without him." David nodded, kneeling beside Thor. "You hear that, buddy? Find Mia, find Oliver." He held out a small hoodie the mother had given them. Thor sniffed it once, then again, and then he was off, nose to the ground, tail straight out, already pulling against the leash. The woods swallowed them whole. David had learned to trust Thor's instincts more than his own. The dog didn't get distracted, didn't get tired. He moved with focus, weaving through underbrush, pausing occasionally to check the wind. David followed closely, flashlight beam cutting through the thickening darkness. Minutes turned to an hour. They passed footprints, old and new, squirrel holes, a deer carcass half buried. The forest was alive with sounds, but none of them human. Then Thor stopped. He sniffed the ground, then barked once, sharp and clear. David knelt beside him and spotted it. A small scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush, blue, fuzzy, teddy bear fur. "Good boy," he whispered. "We're close." Thor began pulling harder, urgency in every step. The path grew rougher. Roots rose like claws from the ground. Fog began to settle low. David felt it in his gut. They were running out of time. Back at base camp, the temperature had already dropped below 40 degrees. Exposure alone could kill a child overnight. Then, through the static on his radio, a voice cracked. "Possible wolf activity reported on the West Ridge. Be advised, stay alert." Wolves, David swore under his breath. This wasn't just about finding Mia anymore. It was about getting to her before something else did. Thor suddenly veered left, barking again. Not a warning, an alert. A signal. David followed, heart pounding. Then he heard it, a snarl. Not Thor. He broke into a sprint. The trees opened into a small clearing, and there he saw them, Mia, curled beneath a tree, clutching a teddy bear, Thor, standing between her and nothing. The wolves were gone, but Thor stood wounded, his side bleeding, fur matted with sweat and mud. He turned as David ran to him, tongue lolling out in a proud grin. David dropped to his knees beside the girl. "Mia." Hey, you okay?" She didn't speak, just nodded slowly, eyes wide with shock. Her tiny hands still clutched the bear. David pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around her. She was ice cold. "You're safe now," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "You're safe." Thor limped over and laid down beside her, resting his head gently on her knee. Mia looked at him for the first time, really looked, and then reached out to stroke his ear. She smiled, just a little. The moment Thor spotted her, his pace changed. There, curled beneath the broad roots of an ancient oak tree, was Mia, small, trembling, clutching a stuffed bear with white knuckles. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto his. In that instant, she wasn't alone anymore, but she was still in danger, because they were there too. A rustle behind her, a low growl from the right, the faintest glint of movement in the bushes. They were closing in. The wolves had not given up their hunt. They were patient, predators, calculating. Thor didn't hesitate. With a deep primal bark that split the air like thunder, he bounded forward, placing himself squarely between Mia and the pack. His body lowered into a defensive stance, chest puffed, hackles raised. He was all muscle and presence, unshaken, unafraid. The wolves paused. They hadn't expected this. Their plan had been to close in slowly, to corner, to pounce. But now a new threat stood in their path, and it did not waver. The lead wolf, larger, scarred, with a dark coat matted from the brush, emerged first. Its eyes locked onto Thor's. Two predators sizing each other up. Behind Thor, Mia didn't move. She was too scared even to cry. Her little hands dug deeper into the dirt, into Oliver's worn body, as if trying to disappear into the earth. Then it began. The lead wolf lunged, and Thor met it mid-air. The two collided with a sickening thud. Teeth snapped, claws tore through. The air exploded with snarls and yelps as they tumbled across the ground, a blur of muscle and fury. Another wolf joined the fray from the side, attempting to flank. Thor, wounded but alert, spun and sank his teeth into its shoulder. The wolf yelped and fell back, but more came. 3, 4. A pack, swirling like a storm around Thor. He stood his ground, biting, ducking, lashing out with unmatched ferocity. Every move was trained, disciplined, purposeful. He didn't fight like a wild animal. He fought like a protector. Mia screamed, her voice high and hoarse, not knowing whether to run or stay, and then, a beam of light. David burst into the clearing, flashlight in one hand, voice roaring above the chaos. "Thor!" The light hit the wolves and they recoiled, blinking against the sudden brightness. David sprinted forward, waving his arms, shouting, making himself larger, louder. "Get back! Get back!" The wolves hesitated. They'd been challenged, and now they were outnumbered. But they weren't gone yet. David reached Thor, who stood bloodied, limping, teeth bared. One of the wolves charged again, but David threw the beam straight into its face and shouted with all the force he could muster. It stopped, snarled. Then slowly the pack began to retreat. One by one, their bodies melted into the darkness of the forest, leaving only crushed leaves and silence behind. The moment they were gone, Thor collapsed. David dropped beside him, heart racing. Blood matted the dog's side, cuts across his flank, a limp in his hind leg. But his eyes were open, he wagged his tail. Once, weakly, "You crazy boy," David whispered, choking on relief. "You held them off." Mia was sobbing now, loud, hiccuping sobs that came from someplace deep inside, the kind of crying that doesn't stop easily. David scooped her into his arms. She clung to him with one hand, still holding tight to Oliver with the other. "You're safe," he whispered. "It's over." But her eyes, wide and tear-filled, were on Thor. "Is he?" she asked, voice barely audible. David looked at the dog lying beside them, bloodied and beaten yet still alert. "He's going to be okay," David said. "He's a fighter." As backup finally arrived, red and blue lights casting long shadows. Through the trees, Thor lifted his head just enough to look back at Mia. She reached out and gently touched his nose, and Thor, even through the pain, wagged his tail. By the time the ambulance pulled away from the forest's edge, the night had fallen completely silent. Wrapped in thermal blankets, Mia sat between two paramedics in the back, still holding Oliver, the only thing that hadn't left her side. Her eyes were red, her lips cracked, and her hair tangled with dirt and leaves. But she was alive. David sat beside her, bruised, exhausted, and stained with Thor's blood. In the corner of the ambulance, the K9 lay on a stretcher of his own, an oxygen mask strapped to his snout, an IV in his leg. Every bump in the road made Mia glance toward him, her tiny fingers tightening around her bear. "Is he going to wake up?" she asked quietly. David didn't answer right away. "He's strong," he finally said. "He's made it through worse, but he's tired now. He needs to rest." Mia nodded, swallowing back a fresh wave of tears. At the hospital, the news of the rescue had already spread. Reporters waited at the entrance. Flashbulbs popped, but no one got close. Not yet. Mia was led inside, past bright lights and waiting. Doctors. Her mother was already there, pacing, crying, disheveled, looking 10 years older than she had just a day ago. The moment she saw her daughter, she collapsed to her knees. Mia didn't speak. She simply walked into her mother's arms and held on as if letting go would take her back into the woods. They stayed that way for a long time. The world could wait. Later, In the quiet of a hospital room, Mia sat by Thor's bedside. His body was wrapped in gauze. Tubes ran from his side. Machines beeped softly. Yet there was a calmness in the air, something unspoken, sacred. She reached out and laid Oliver beside him. "He stayed with me," she whispered. "So now I'll stay with him." It took 2 days for Thor to open his eyes. When he did, the first thing he saw was Mia, asleep in a chair beside him, hand resting gently on his paw. He blinked slowly, then wagged his tail. Weeks passed. Mia spoke more now. Not much, but enough. Enough to tell her mom about the woods, about the wolves, about the dog who never left her. She started sleeping through the night again. She even went outside. The town called Thor a hero. There were medals, ceremonies, news crews. But Mia didn't care about the cameras. What mattered was that every Thursday she visited Thor, now retired from the field at the station. Sometimes she read him books. Sometimes she just sat with him. And sometimes she whispered things to him that she couldn't tell anyone else. Things about being lost and being found. But not everything had healed. Not yet. Because somewhere in the woods, far from the lights and the noise and the warmth of home, the pack still moved, still watched, and deep in the dark, something waited. But that is a story for another time.